Heaven sent.
The early 2000s were an amazing time to be alive. From having an ice cold pink Sobe on a hot summer day, to fumbling through your CD collection on a road trip with your buddies, technology was at a happy medium, with internet use being functional yet limited, forcing many people to actually go outside of their homes and socialize with one another. I know, crazy right? Anyways, among some of the more questionable trends of this time period came a culture shift that was felt throughout the communities all across the globe. The pants were bigger, the hair was spikier, and the shoes, well, they looked like they were made by Tempur-Pedic. But these were trends among a vast majority of youth at the time, within a culture that was heavily inspired by music and extreme sports. Extreme sports were making waves on national TV, as well as in a city near you, with local skating competitions, freestyle motocross shows, and the X Games having a huge impact on many suggestive brains of the late 90s to early 2000s. And with the rise in popularity of these incredible daredevilish activities, the corporate suits have been carefully watching for what trends they could capitalize on next. And with the gaming industry being home to the corporate suitiest of them all, many companies have been creating a wide variety of video games dealing in the realms of extreme sports. And today, we're here to discuss some of the incredible and sometimes embarrassing offerings that came to be, as well as discussing their influence on the culture and their importance in gaming. So make sure to strap on your helmet and crack open an ice cold yoo-hoo as we dive into the world of extreme sports games of the early 2000s. Amidst the sixth generation of consoles, the PlayStation 2 is well documented in being a catalyst for progression in the gaming industry. And upon its release, a slew of launch titles were presented to the public, with plenty enough variety to ensure that everyone could find something they'd enjoy. And leading up to this point, EA had been hard at work in keeping the realms of sport games under their wing, and were looking to branch out into much more unique offerings for their future releases. Extreme sports were rising in popularity at this time, and what better way to capitalize on these trends than by creating games about them? EA decided it was time to go all in, and create a whole new division of developers to create these titles. This new division became EA Big, and are a team that will have a hand in many of the games on this list. But going back to the release of the PlayStation 2, EA and their new team of developers were looking to bring in the new millennium with a new face in the genre of snowboarding. And with their next game being on the lineup of release titles for the PS2, they knew they were going to have to create something special. And on October 26, 2000, the world of gaming was finally introduced with EA Big's very first game, by the name of SSX. SSX is by far one of the most stylish gaming series to ever exist, and with their first three titles being just that good, I figured I would take the time to cover all three of them, revisiting their strengths and just enjoying the sheer amount of fun they were. But going back to SSX, this was a genre-defining moment for the world of snowboarding, and was a visual delight for the world of gaming in general. With prior snowboarding IPs such as Cool Boarders and 1080 Snowboarding having built a solid fan base of enthusiasts throughout the years, EA was well aware of what they would need to do to separate themselves from the pack, and luckily thanks to the technical advancements of the PlayStation 2's hardware, they were able to create a game that was not only fun as hell, but purely a work of art. This game is dripping style in every facet of its design, from the menu screens, the character designs, the layout of each track, and even the user interface. Everything is so perfectly designed to fit that early 2000s aesthetic, and even more so, captures the essence of this game's futuristically inspired atmosphere. Now the basis of the game is simple enough. You can unlock new tracks and upgrade your characters through completing the game's world circuit mode, which will have you racing and tricking your way through an array of uniquely designed courses, each with their own level of difficulty, which will steadily increase as you progress. You can also get plenty of practice in the courses with the regular single player modes, and even have a buddy join along for 2-player couch co-op. While this may sound simple enough, what really makes the game stand out is its mechanics. While the game initially plays like your typical snowboarding game, SSX puts emphasis on making your runs as stylish as possible. It will encourage you to get major air and bust out as many tricks as you possibly can. Landing tricks and performing combos will earn your character a boost, which will further aid them in winning their races, as well as achieving longer hang times. While the mechanics of the game weren't quite as polished as they would be in later releases, SSX still did an amazing job at giving its players an addictive and highly enjoyable snowboarding experience. And while the game was highly favored across the boards, it was only right that EA Big would take their new IP to the drawing board and turn the volume up to 11 with their next release. Their next concept will finally come to fruition just a year later with the highly anticipated release of SSX Tricky. Tricky had taken the foundation of its predecessor and basically improved upon the game's formula in every way possible. The characters were even cooler, new levels were added as well as old ones being reworked and made even better, and the mechanics for controlling your character felt much tighter this time around, making the game easier to pick up on and even more so intriguing the master. They also made changes to the boost mechanic, incorporating a tricky meter, which would fill up upon knocking down opposing competition or landing sick combos. While filling this meter up, you'll hear the Run DMC song It's Tricky being recited with each progression, and upon filling your meter, you're able to perform special moves, which is really such a satisfying way to earn points and it's just a damn good time to look at. Tricky had accomplished everything you could ask for in a good sequel, taking a great game and improving upon where it may have fell short. And while it's highly regarded as one of the greatest games of the early 2000s, the third game in the SSX series is actually regarded as the greatest of its franchise. Shortly after the success of SSX Tricky, EA Big had hastily began development on furthering the series. This time around they wanted to expand the game's universe and create an experience that was much more immersive, but doing so in a way that still kept the very surreal arcade nature of the series while improving upon all of its previous shortcomings. They decided that the game would feature a much more open world, giving players a sense of freedom never before seen. They would include the typical circuit modes, as well as character progression throughout the story, and after an almost 3-year-long development process, SSX3 was released to the world on October 21st, 2003. And my lord, was it a beauty. First off, as we had previously mentioned, they took more of an open world approach with this game, and in my opinion, it's one of the reasons it's top tier SSX. There are 3 different peaks to explore, all with progressive difficulty, and multiple courses being interconnected, meaning you can literally free roam from one course to another, or just take the lift to so-called fast travel. There are also multiple ski lodges or rest stops found within the mountain, which gives you a place to both upgrade and customize your character. This time around the customization is more fleshed out, allowing you to present your character in a much more unique fashion than the previous games. And with this being accompanied by some of the best snowboarding action the world of gaming has ever seen, it's a masterpiece. Now what I love about the design on SSX3 is the effort they put into making these courses so functional. While the first 2 games had their share of unique level design, where I personally felt they sometimes fell short was in how difficult they could be to stylishly maneuver. I mean, it was probably just a skill issue on my part, but with SSX3, it feels like every inch of the course has a purpose and flows in a way that makes more sense. There's plenty of room to adjust through turns, jumps are put in more tasteful areas, and the challenge is still greatly present nonetheless. I never wanted an easier SSX experience, I just wanted it to feel a little more functional, and for me personally, SSX3 provided that. Now I hate to keep harping on the soundtrack, as pretty much every game on this list has a great soundtrack, but the music in the SSX series really is something else, and as far as SSX3 is concerned, oh, the vibes are immaculate, my friend. With over 40 licensed tracks being included in the game, there's a little bit of something for everybody. But if you're a major fan of house music or ambient techno like I am, well, you're gonna be in heaven while playing. It's a damn near perfect gaming experience if you ask me, and if I could add anything, it would probably just be an option to create your own character. But other than that, the first 3 games of the SSX series are something of royalty in the realms of extreme sports gaming, and is a series that is sure to find a place in the hearts of all gamers across the globe. EA Big knew that their players were in need of something next level, with simple mechanics and fast-paced gameplay to really satiate the cravings of next-gen gamers. But in the end, they created an arsenal of timeless classics, ones that I will be sure to continue playing for many years to come. And while the next game on our list may not have been as influential as SSX was, it's definitely a worthy contender. So get ready to pop the clutch and bust a couple of wheelies, cause we're going off-roading. As we had previously mentioned in our section about the SSX series, EA Big was a development studio spawned in response to the growing demand of extreme sports titles in the early 2000s. Players were looking to go fast and fly high in any games they could get their hands on, and with EA Big being responsible in showing the world how a good snowboarding game could be done, it was time for them to branch out into other sports and see what they could come up with next. Freestyle motocross was a sport that was beginning to pick up some serious momentum at this time, with growing popularity in the X Games viewership and Travis Pastrana's cable TV show, Nitro Circus, being a huge part of this rising interest. I mean, even the motocross clothing brands were pretty big at this time, with many popular companies such as Metal Militia being a staple for many PacSun shopping teens of the early 2000s. This incredibly daring sport was getting more exposure than ever before, and with its popularity began a rise in interest for more video games simulating it. EA Big had taken notice of this, and decided it was time for them to strap on their boots and get ready to kick up some mud in Freestyle. Freestyle is a game that took the formula of motocross racing and decided to expand it into an adrenaline-soaked experience, with surreal level design and even more surreal tricks to pull off. Starting with the game's roster of playable characters, you're given a selection between 8 different players, all of which are real-life freestyle motocross riders, with the lovely Leanne being a bit of an exception. Each character has a slew of unlockables to grind for, with the bikes you earn progressively getting better over time, and with 4 different modes of gameplay, including a world circuit much like the one in SSX, you're sure to have plenty of fun getting acquainted with quite possibly one of the greatest motocross games of all time. Freestyle really is a totally new experience compared to most MX racers at this time, mostly in part to its insane level design. Much like you would expect from EA Big, each course is jam-packed with dangerous drops and death-defying jumps, with a wide array of hidden areas and bonus jumps to be found throughout each level. As you progress throughout the circuit, so does the difficulty of each course. And when I say this game can be unforgiving to mistakes, I mean that. This is a game that will have you on edge the entire way through, as the AI is pretty hard to shake, even on some of the easier modes. Taking on each jump will require precision and necessary speed control to ensure your momentum is steady. And with tricks being the only way to earn boost, you gotta be sure to dish out a variety of different moves if you want to make it to first place. Now the trick system is definitely one of the best parts of this game, with over 54 different moves and combinations to achieve. The tricks are done by getting air and holding various top buttons of your controller, with the ability to tweak each trick and string together combos. Each time you successfully pull off a trick, it will replenish your boost, as well as fill up your freakout meter. Doing an assortment of tricks rather than repeating will gain you more momentum, and once you fully replenish your freakout meter, it's time to find your biggest jump and pull off a freakout move. Upon successfully landing one of these moves, your tires will become engulfed in flames, and you'll begin moving quicker than ever before. The length of this boost will depend on how many tricks you can pull off, and really gives the game that much more excitement throughout each race. It's hard to find a motocross game with this much style and attitude in it, but it's pretty much the greatness you would have expected from EA Big at that time. It had the great music, excellent character design, and more than enough reason for replayability to keep its players hooked. It's personally my favorite motocross game ever, and is one that I often revisit, even to this day. But I think it's time we move on to our next game on the roster, as it's one that also includes plenty of handlebar maneuvers and big air just like Freakout. So without further ado, let's get ready to pay homage to the late and great Dave Mirra, with Dave Mirra's Freestyle BMX. When talking about the sport of freestyle BMX, Dave Mirra is a name that is sure to be a part of the conversation. Back in the early 2000s, coverage on the X Games had reached an all-time peak, with the 8th edition being the most viewed event in all of X Games history. And with the freestyle BMX scene having a huge part in this live event, Dave Mirra was a dominant force in the competitive world of BMX vert. Having just won the gold medal a year prior, showing up with a beat-up ankle and riding alongside the legendary Matt Hoffman, Dave and Matt gave X Games 8 one of the most beautiful moments in BMX history, with Matt landing the very first no-handed 900. And just seeing the reaction on Dave Mirra's face showed it all. This was a man who lived and breathed freestyle BMX, and wanted to showcase it in a way that people of all ages could enjoy. Going back to the year of 2000, Z-Axis, a small development studio from San Mateo, California, had been taking note in the recent success of the newfound Tony Hawk series, and were looking to put a new spin on the genre and basically create a Tony Hawk game, but with BMX bikes. This idea eventually came to fruition, with Dave Mirra being the star of the series and Dave Mirra's Freestyle BMX. Initially being released on the Sony PlayStation and later to the Dreamcast, GBA, and home computer, Dave Mirra's Freestyle was a beautiful introduction into the world of extreme BMX, spawning a game that carried the same arcadey nature of the Tony Hawk series, with a whole new dose of attitude from the BMX scene. This game was so sick to play as a kid. I mean, I remember the day my dad came home with it, wrapped up in a media play bag, and gave it to me as an early birthday gift. I was a huge Pro Skater fan at the time, and with how well they transferred that formula into BMX, this came to be an instant classic in my rotation. And with the reception of the game being generally positive among critics, you already know they were ramped up to come out with a sequel, improving on all aspects of the previous game and of course, launching it for next-gen consoles. The sequel came in the form of Dave Mirra's Freestyle BMX 2, and raised the handlebars in pretty much every way you could imagine. The game featured improved visuals. Well, these didn't age too well, but at the time they were improved. Another banger of a licensed soundtrack, more fleshed out and in-depth locales to bike through, and even the return of the Slim Jim guy, which, is he related to Max Payne by chance? Anyways. Most of the game modes present in the game were making a return from the original, but this time around, they decided to add in a fully functional park editor, giving the game an immense amount of replayability. It was nothing short of a blast messing around with this feature too, and just seeing what kinds of extravagant creations you and your friends could come up with, it was priceless. The challenges were fun and presented plenty to do in the ProQuest mode, a feature that allowed you to play through each level, completing challenges and unlocking rewards. Not to mention, there was a competition held by Slim Jim for one lucky winner to be featured in the game as a playable character, which was won by then 13-year-old Mike Diaz, whose likeness was used as a rider in the game, which I thought was pretty cool. I can only imagine how exciting that was for him at the time. At the end of the day, I felt it was important to include this series, to revisit a classic as well as to pay homage to one of the greatest BMX riders of all time. It's a game that hits a little different since the passing of Dave Mirra, and is responsible in supplying endless wonderful memories for gamers of all walks of life. So thank you Dave Mirra and the team at Z-Axis for keeping his legacy alive. It only goes to show that legends never die. Throughout the history of extreme sports and its vast evolution, wrestling is one that has especially reigned supreme for those growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. With the WWF and WWE both respectively having a huge influence on the culture of wrestling, it was only right that we would see an arsenal of wrestling titles being released throughout the years. Now this influence gifted us some incredible titles, with the Def Jam series being a prime example. But lurking in the shadows, there was a bastard child in the realms of wrestling games, hoping to make its mark on the genre and appeal to a demographic that probably buys their cough syrup in bulk. With a classy duo like the Insane Clown Posse being the poster boys for the game we're about to discuss, well, what could go wrong? Pretty much everything. Backyard Wrestling 2, There Goes the Neighborhood, a game that was developed by Paradox Entertainment and published by Eidos, is a game that was ambitious in nature, but completely butchered in its execution. Now I'm not here to drop my load on the sport of backyard wrestling, as a lot of respectable professionals had gotten their start in backyard federations, the Hardy Brothers and CM Punk both being notable examples. And while Paradox Entertainment had done their best at bringing the attitude and spirit of this off-the-walls wrestling style into a video game, it's the lack of polish and overall effort that really made this series a laughingstock. Now don't get me wrong, there's still more than enough fun to be had while playing, as you're sure to get plenty of entertainment just watching this game faceplant. From the terrible sound design,
created to win. Oh shit.
Glitched out assets, to this.
Our pets' heads are falling off!
I couldn't go 2 minutes without seeing something go wrong every time I'd play a match. I mean, just look at these physics. What is that? And the character design is equally hilarious, especially the names. Evil Doo-Doo. I really can't make this stuff up. Now while I shouldn't expect the game from 2004 to have the fanciest visuals or the most cutting edge voice acting, it really had no excuse for being this poorly designed. The UI is both outdated and unappealing, The combat mechanics are slow and repetitive, and the AI of your foes in the game are virtually non-existent. Except El Drunko. This dude was destroying me. But anyways, let me take a break from ripping this game to shreds and comment on a couple of the positive things I found while playing. Now back in 2005, I actually owned this game, and maybe it was the excessive amount of hair gel seeping into my brain or just my complete lack of judgment at that age, but I was a major fan of the Insane Clown Posse at that time, and with Shaggy 2 Dope and Violent J having a storied history in backyard wrestling themselves, I was amped to get to play as them in the game. And while I literally just trashed the game's character design about 2 minutes ago, I always thought they did a good job at designing the duo's characters, and even their movesets. They look more like they belonged in a Def Jam game than this one though, and it's kind of strange they weren't, seeing as they were signed to Island Def Jam Records at the time. But anyways, enough on that. Another great thing about the game is the licensed soundtrack, which featured many great artists such as Mudvayne, Saliva, Fall Out Boy, and Hoobastank, all of which did a great job in bringing the initial energy needed to make a great wrestling game. But if only the gameplay was lively enough to carry on the momentum of this energy, then maybe we'd be in business. But other than the option of creating your own character and a plethora of cool little unlockables and customization features, there's really not much else I can say about it. It takes a pretty great concept and just clumsily falls all over itself, and ends up feeling more like a gag gift than an actual game. And while there are plenty of legendary wrestlers who are being represented in the game, you'd think they would have taken more time in making an in-depth combat system, rather than just making another cookie-cutter wrestling game with repetitive moves and venues. And while I can't speak for everyone when I say this game is a hot pile of garbage, I definitely can't see anyone who's ever played any of the classics to be able to endorse this foolishness. It was an ambitious effort that Paradox had made in creating this title, but that's about all I can give them after reviewing the finished product. I think you'd just be better off watching the game's actual footage of backyard wrestling, as this game just couldn't keep up with its competition. So if you find yourself in need of a little more streetwise wrestling action, I'd just stick with the Def Jam series, because Backyard Wrestling 2 definitely shouldn't be tried at home. In the realm of extreme sports titles, one small team of developers were heavily responsible in supplying the industry with more than enough board sliding and bunny hopping action to go around. Activision O2 was a small subsidiary company of Activision Studios and had a hand in almost every pro-themed sports title of the early 2000s. Most known for their work on Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, they were also responsible in creating the Matt Hoffman series, as well as Sean Palmer's Pro Snowboarder. These were games that were created in almost direct result of their thriving competition, but one certain game on their roster was aiming to be the best of its kind. Kelly Slater's Pro Surfer, available on all 6th generation consoles, as well as the PC and Game Boy Advance, is a title that was aiming to take its players on a wild ride into the captivating world of pro surfing. You'll pick your character and climb aboard a ship in search of some of the world's most famous surfing locales. From Sebastian, Florida, to the gnarly rip curls of Misaki, Japan, you'll find yourself traveling the globe, searching for the gnarliest waves, as well as competing in competitions and completing various challenges. Much like the Tony Hawk series, you'll be given a list of tasks to complete throughout each location, and as you progress throughout the campaign, your chosen character will increase in experience, becoming a better surfer over time, as well as unlocking some pretty sweet boards along the way. The game does an incredible job of introducing you into the world of surfing, with the help of Kelly Slater guiding you throughout each location. He'll often describe with his own personal experiences how to tackle each wave, and what to expect from it, as the art of surfing is much more complicated than one may think. The game makes use of multiple mechanics to stylishly ride each wave, with special moves and other tricks being uncovered as you grow in experience. From board grabs to flips, carving techniques and crazy tube tricks, everything that you could ask for in a surfing simulator is here, but it's presented in an easy to digest fashion. Much like the Tony Hawk games, Pro Surfer makes use of a combo system, meaning you can string together tricks, multiplying your overall score. This is especially satisfying to pull off on your runs, and really shows the artistic beauty that is presented in riding these massive waves. And much like any veteran surfer will tell you, the ocean has a mind of its own. Without being unable to control the motion of these waves, you really have no choice but to quickly adapt. or be swallowed whole in their wake. And when riding some of the more dangerous waves found later in the game, you'll come to see exactly what I mean. This was a game that really, truly breathes surfing in a beautiful way, and presents its players with a relaxing yet engaging style of play that's hard to put down at times. Plus it also includes Tony Hawk and motocross king Travis Pastrana's unlockable characters, which is definitely a dope bonus. It's a game that I had slept on for many years, and after giving it a playthrough for my research, I have to say I'm a bit ashamed for waiting as long as I did. It's an excellent addition into the trend of extreme sports titles, and with such a beautiful sport as surfing being overlooked in the gaming industry for so long, it's a blessing to know that a surfing game of this caliber exists. So if you ever find the ocean calling your name, Kelly Slater Pro Surfer is a safe bet for any summertime gaming session. Just don't forget to pack your sunscreen. You're sure to be catching plenty of rays. Now the next game on our list was actually the very reason I had become inspired in making this video. Going back to my younger years as a degenerate skater and avid extreme sports enthusiast, I found myself very fond of anything that had wheels and could be catapulted off a ramp. And while I typically enjoyed skateboarding more than just about anything, I also found quite a bit of passion in a sport that was much more overlooked: inline skating. And while Jet Set Radio shined a stylish light on rollerblading in the year of 2000, the 2002 release of Aggressive Inline had solidified itself as the greatest rollerblading game of all time. Well, in my opinion, of course. This is a game that immediately takes me back to much simpler times every moment I spend playing it. It was a staple in me discovering one of my favorite alt-rock bands of all time, Hoobastank. From the very moment the intro cutscene begins and Crawling in the Dark starts playing, it's pure nostalgic bliss. But not only from a personal perspective was this game a complete banger, the critics would agree as well. But what made it so special? Well, it was great for various reasons. Beginning with the game's development team, Z-Axis, who are responsible in creating the Dave Mirra series, they were aiming to build on the success of their widely loved BMX franchise with something new and much more unique. As previously mentioned, extreme inline skating was a sport that wasn't anywhere near as popular as BMX or skateboarding, so finding a game that was willing to delve into details of inline skating, with its wide catalog of tricks and styles, had yet to be done. And with Z-Axis already having the engine needed to make a great extreme sports title, they were confident they could bring the world of aggressive inline to a whole new audience. They also aimed to implement some even more unique features for the game, such as an organic progression system, meaning that instead of spending points you've earned on character progression, you'll be able to improve your character simply by using a skill more. For example, the more time that you spend doing grinds, the better your character will become at grinding, so on and so forth. They also opted for removing time limits within each level and replacing the clock with a juice meter, meaning the player would have to continuously dish out tricks or collect juice boxes to keep the game from ending. Both of these features were unique to Aggressive Inline at the time, and were cause for innovation for many future sports titles that came after. And while these features definitely helped the game stand out, where Aggressive Inline effortlessly shone was in its gameplay. The game's story mode offers 7 different levels, well, 8 if you count the tutorial, all of which having many different secret locations and hidden areas to uncover. Now you're probably wondering how the control scheme of the game is laid out, like how do they make simulation rollerblading work? Well, it plays very similar to Tony Hawk in some ways, with triangle being used for grinds, D-pad for balance, and circle being used for grabs. But it also offers even more refined control of your character, with the R1 button being used to switch stances, and the back triggers used to spin your character. And while it may seem a bit complicated in writing, playing it in real time is incredibly satisfying, and really keeps you engaged throughout each level. Now much like most games of this era, you'll be tasked with a list of challenges to complete before carrying on to the next area, some being easy while others being much more difficult. Each challenge you complete will award you with points, and once you reach a certain threshold, you unlock a new level. It's pretty standard stuff, but what's really dope about the game is how they include a list of hidden challenges that will unlock certain areas of the map, and even lead to unlocking hidden characters. Ooh. Now with the internet and walkthrough guides being so readily available nowadays, the excitement for that may be a bit short-lived in present day. But way back in the day, when we had nothing but our imagination and pure willpower to figure things out, oh man, these hidden areas were a good old time. And even without including these extra areas, the maps are already widely expansive, with plenty of detail and interactive challenges to explore throughout each level. The game features a wide roster of both pro inline athletes as well as fictional characters to play with, as well as a litany of attributes and moves to master for each one. It really brings a great sense of replayability to the game and keeps you coming back for more. And honestly, one of my favorite things about aggressive Inline is that it never takes itself too seriously. It's a great mix of accurate simulation mixed with arcade-style wackiness, and the creative, often humorous level design and characters really do an amazing job at taking you back to much simpler times. This is a game that I'm greatly fond of, and due to inline skating being much more overlooked in the realms of extreme sports, I feel it's also a game that's been severely underrated. Whether you enjoy emulating older games or prefer the old school joys of physical retro gaming, this is a title that is both very widely available and cheap to buy if you're looking to give it a go for yourself. It's easily in my top 3 for greatest extreme sports games to ever do it, and is a game that I found myself coming back to for multiple generations now. So if you find yourself in need for a good dose of early 2000s nostalgia, as well as some good old-fashioned extreme sports goodness, Aggressive Inline is sure to satisfy even the most jaded of gamers. It's a game that was well received for great reason, and for as long as I'm here, I'll always do my best to spread the word about it. So get ready to oil your bearings and turn up the soundtrack. You've got some skating to do. Much like our previous entry of Freestyle, the next game on our list is one that has quite possibly shaped the musical taste of an entire generation. Me being a prime example for that statement. But not only was it a series loaded with a roster of incredible soundtracks, it was also a staple for the realm of extreme sports titles. So coming in on 4 wheels and plenty of attitude is the ATV Off-Road Fury series. Beginning in February of 2001, the very first entry of the ATV Off-Road series was released on the PlayStation 2. It was the first in-depth game focused on the world of off-road vehicles. It featured a slew of racing and freestyle modes to partake in, with over 20 different locations to explore. And while these were all great additions, the game's standout features were in its well-designed vehicle mechanics. Your ATV can be used to bust a variety of different freestyle tricks, all of which can be manipulated with the L1 button. And taking into consideration of weight and physics that go into play on these courses, you're able to shift the weight of your ATV as a means of sustaining your momentum on the course. And while this comes with a bit of a learning curve at first, once you're used to it, you'll see why it makes the game that much more exciting. Mixing these engaging mechanics with high speeds, big jumps, and an amazing soundtrack, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who wasn't having a damn good time with this game in 2001. And with the success of their very first entry, Rainbow Studios felt it was time for them to step back into the lab and bring a sequel to fruition as soon as possible. Just a year later, this concept came to be, and ATV Off-Road Fury 2 was released. With improvements on every aspect of the original, it was also the first in the series to offer online play, in which players could join up with others across the globe and compete for the gold in their very own races. And not only was the game flush with tighter mechanics and new vehicles to acquire, they also gave the game an appealing visual overhaul, including immersive details such as your vehicle and rider becoming dirty while playing, and tricks and character models having a much more realistic look. Now the ATV series was having a very successful run at this time, with the first 2 games selling very well, but for me personally, the third entry has always had my vote. Now from the very moment you load up ATV Off-Road Fury 3, you're met with a mysterious cutscene of an ATV rider in the desert. Slipknot's Duality begins playing in the background, and upon further viewing, begins possibly one of the coolest intros in PS2 history. Now this may just be the nostalgia talking, but when I tell you this game goes hard, I'm talking bricked up, brother. I spent so many hours after school every day just playing this game, usually in free mode or creating my own courses, and it's just one of those experiences that really takes you back to simpler times. Now much like the second game in the series, 3 was looking to improve on every aspect of its predecessors, but with having Rainbow Studios bought out by THQ, it looked as though a whole new team was going to be working on the development of the third entry, and the team in question came to be Climax Racing. Climax Racing were responsible in creating the beloved MotoGP series, and with their experience in creating high-octane racing simulation for 2-wheeled bikes, what's a couple extra tires gonna hurt? They got to work on releasing the game for multiple platforms this time around, with the port for the PSP being released under the name ATV Off-Road Fury Blazing Trails. But going back to the PlayStation 2 release of 3, this was the peak of the series in my opinion. Characters and textures looked better than ever, controls were tighter, the vehicles had more weight to them, as well as the course selection and soundtrack just being the best. Now I feel like I'm incredibly biased in my retrospective report of the game, as I have a lot of great memories while playing. And just not this game, the whole series. But out of curiosity, I decided to see if I was the only one who held such fond memories for these games. And safe to say, I'm definitely not alone. And while the series did continue on to release a fourth entry, before being blended into the MX vs ATV series, I feel that it's commonly agreed upon that the first three games held the biggest impact for gamers of the 6th gen. The soundtracks were a staple for many shaping music tastes at the time. The easy to pick up gameplay was addicting, and introducing online play with the slew of couch co-op really made this series one that you'd be doing yourself no favors to miss out on. And while it was widely available to many, with most of the titles being promoted in demo disc or included with the PS2, if you've somehow never given this game a shot, it may be too late to revel in how special it was for its time. But nonetheless, it's a solid franchise with more than enough content to delve into. So I say whether you're a newbie to the series or returning back to a distant memory, just remember to wear your helmet, my friends. Safety first. With the rise of extreme sports, this caused an insurgence of new and often overlooked activities to become much more popular. Heelys, extreme pogo, and shoes with a grinding plate called soapies, all being some of the strangest offerings for this time period. But for extreme scootering to become part of this trend, now that was unexpected. Scooters have had a documented existence going all the way back to the 1920s, with the very first brand name scooter being manufactured by Honda in 1974. But one man by the name of Carlton Calvin was looking to change the world of scooters for good. He started a company called Razor USA and began work on reinventing the design of the original scooter into something much more compact and sleek. These efforts came to see the inception of the very first Razor scooter, which became a staple for almost every kid who had grown up in the 90s. The frame of his scooters consisted of airplane-grade aluminum, with 98mm polyurethane wheels and a hinge that could be used as a brake over the back wheel. Whereas the earlier versions of the scooter felt more like a standing bicycle, the Razor scooter was more like a skateboard with handlebars, allowing riders the ability to learn tricks and even take it off of ramps. And some people took these opportunities to a whole new level. A new extreme sport was on the horizon, and many young riders were dominating skate parks across the globe with their newfound passion for freestyle scooter. The first pro scene was founded by Razor. It consisted of a small team of incredibly talented young riders. The team received plenty of coverage on their skills, with videos like Razor Evolution showcasing the team performing their moves across many skate parks and street locales around the globe. And the rise in popularity even sparked Razor's very own magazine, dedicated to the sport. The Razor craze was in full effect, and as with the majority of games on this list, an inspiration from the Tony Hawk series had led to talks of a freestyle scooter video game being produced. And with the green light being given by Crave Entertainment and Shava Games for development over this idea, the creation of Razor Freestyle Scooter had officially begun. Now this game is pretty much what you would expect, as with most games coming out of this era. But what surprised me the most was how fun it was, despite being so similar to the competition. The game is pretty bare bones, with only a circuit mode, free ride, and 2-player options being available. And as you can see, there are only 2 different characters we can play with. That's because there's actually a very strange plot behind this game, which you're briefed on in a short introduction cutscene. Apparently, your friends have been kidnapped by an evil robot, who is forcing you to complete challenges on your scooter in order to free them and progress throughout the game. Strange. The story mode revolves around 3 different levels, all of which will supply you with a variety of challenges that will progress with difficulty as you move on through the game. The challenges are very similar to ones we've seen in other games, with trick scores and collecting items being the common goal. But once you make your way through the 3 initial levels, you'll unlock a location called a Sky Fortress, which will give you the task of collecting all the scooter wheels before the time runs out. If you can complete this task, one of your friends will be freed, and you will now be able to play the game with that new character. Also, for some very mysterious reason, they included the UFC fighter Tito Ortiz as an unlockable character. Don't ask me why. Anywho, it's an incredibly repetitive game, but for the first hour or so of playing, I still enjoyed my time with it. It's got a weird art style, tough frame rates, and a very small selection of activities to work with. But it's easy to pick up mechanics, decent soundtrack, and nostalgic feel, still giving an experience that's worthy of checking out. I mean, if you liked riding scooters as a kid at least. It's not the best offering of this era, but it's definitely a staple for a sport that made a massive impact on the early 2000s, and it's still a sport that is decently popular among enthusiasts. So yeah, check it out if you like, but you'd probably be better off with just about anything else on this list. But for our 9th and final entry in the series, it's time for us to pay respects to the most legendary franchise in all of extreme sports titles, a series that was partially responsible for almost every game on this list, and is one that influenced multiple generations, in many ways than just one. So without further ado, it's time for us to dive into the lengthy and well-respected world of the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series. Let's go. It's been a wild journey thus far, and in regards to the wide variety of games we've covered in this video, there's little to no doubt in my mind that they may have never existed if it weren't for the enormous impact of the Tony Hawk series. But what was it about these games that made them so influential? Well, to answer that, I think we should go back to the beginning. The development of the very first Tony Hawk game was something of an experiment. Activision were taking notice of a growing trend in skateboarding games at the time, and were shopping around many different developers to make their new vision come to life. The development studio of Neversoft were interested in taking on their project, but their offer was initially shot down. Activision was already in talks with another company on handling their game, but came to find they wouldn't be too impressed with the dev's prototype. This led to them eventually circling back to Neversoft, who was finally entrusted with the creation of their new project. But at this time, the devs at Neversoft were a bit puzzled on how to approach this. It's documented that the team would typically take their lunch breaks at a local bowling alley, which had an arcade cabinet of Sega's newest skateboarding simulation game by the name of Top Skater. The team had put a lot of time into playing this game, noting the strengths and weaknesses in its formula. Their biggest gripe with Top Skater was in how linear the game was, which basically inspired them in creating an open map to explore in their own game, with each level being designed with fun and freedom as a top priority. Neversoft had just released the PlayStation exclusive title of Apocalypse earlier that year, featuring Bruce Willis as a main character. They ended up using that game's engine in the development of Tony Hawk, as well as Bruce being the skateboarding crash dummy in their prototype. And after learning that, I really wish they would have included him as a secret character in the final version. But anyways, they found that in order to finish the project, they were going to need the help of an actual professional skateboarder. Tony Hawk had been one of the most influential figures in skateboarding at that time, and so they arranged a meeting in which they would present the game to him and see if he'd be interested in getting involved. Tony was incredibly impressed with the game, as well as the dedication of Neversoft, and agreed to a deal in which they could use his name and likeness for a percentage of every copy sold. With Hawk on board, Neversoft kept him heavily involved in reviewing the game's progress. They would send him CDR copies of the game to play on his modified PlayStation, in which he would report his likes and dislikes of the game's current build, which they would then make adjustments to. They also gave Mr. Hawk the task of rounding up a squad to be featured in the game, most of which were some of his greatest buddies. Each person featured in the game were given royalties for their appearances, as well as their pick of clothing and a special move. And with this much dedication to skateboarding and its culture being of importance to the game's development, it's no surprise why it was one of the most influential titles in all of gaming history. Releasing on September 29, 1999, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater had completely turned the gaming industry upside down and was met with an overwhelmingly positive response. Many critics and players alike were enamored with its imaginative gameplay, as well as its ambitious effort in immersing its players with skateboarding culture. The soundtrack was heavily praised, the physics were awe-inspiring, and people just couldn't get enough of everything this game had to offer. And while it's no question as to whether or not Neversoft had succeeded in their mission, many were left wondering as to what was next for the series. Dominating the late 90s and early 2000s with a slew of sequels, the Tony Hawk series had been a commanding force in the genre of extreme sports for well over 2 decades. The Pro Skater brand had been refined and polished throughout the mid-2000s, eventually leading to a more experimental formula, being added in the Tony Hawk Underground series. This time around, they wanted to give players a chance to create their very own skater and play through a story mode dedicated to their character's growth. The level design had also become even more expansive, with the developers pushing the technical limits on making each map as big as possible. Combining these changes with other functional innovations such as being able to get off your board and freely walk around gave the game a whole new feel and reinvented the original formula in a way that brought in players both old and new. The Underground series came to spawn 2 different titles, before moving on to the likes of American Wasteland, Project 8, and Proving Ground, as well as a handful of more interactive releases, with Tony Hawk's Ride and Shred, all of which made use of a skateboarding-shaped peripheral and motion-based gameplay. And while the series had began to simmer down in hype as the 2010s rolled on, it's absolutely without a doubt that the Tony Hawk series is by far one of the most influential of all time. So many games were the direct result of Pro Skater's success, and if we're being honest, it played a massive role in shining a light on the entire world of extreme sports. From rollerblading, snowboarding, any extreme sport you can imagine, they were all affected by the influence of this game in one way or another. It gave people a newfound interest in the world of extreme sports, brought the X Games to its highest popularity, and became the catalyst in bringing together cultures in a way that had never been seen before. And as a person who has deeply loved skateboarding for many years and everything involved with its culture, I can proudly say that playing this series as a child had made a huge impact on me. It introduced me to a sport that taught me the importance of perseverance, made me feel a part of something much bigger than myself, and gave me some of the best memories of my childhood. And I'm not alone in this, as it's well documented that many of our present-day professional skateboarders and extreme sports enthusiasts were also massive fans of the Tony Hawk series. And who knows, if the Pro Skater games had never existed, would the outcome have been the same? It's rare to see a video game have such an impact on multiple generations, but in my opinion, without a doubt, the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series has to be one of them. So if you were deeply affected by the Pro Skater games and want to talk about your favorite, drop a comment down below. I would love to talk shop with you all. But much like a perfect running combo or a beautifully waxed rail, all things must eventually come to an end. And with that, we found ourselves at the end of the road, my friends. Well, boys and girls, what a fun one. As much as I loved revisiting all these great games from my childhood, it made me remember I'm getting old, but it was a blast getting to do this video and I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. As always, if there's any games that I may have missed out on or you'd like to see me cover in the future, please drop a comment down below. I always take note of your guys' suggestions, but I've been pretty much editing the past 3 weeks straight, so I think we're going to take the day off tomorrow and hop back on my skateboard. It's been a while, but before I go, I just want to thank you guys for the incredible support and everything you guys have done for me and the channel. It really means the world to me. I hope to see you guys in the next video, and please take care of yourselves. Until next time, stay safe and stay blessed. Peace out.